Did you really think you can give me a line like that and I wouldn't run with it eventually? This one's for you, Kevin. I hope you enjoy. But first, hello, my name is Garvin and I read things and howl about them on the internet for your entertainment. Not too long ago, I did a video on the different myths and stories of dog-headed men. So now, we're going to talk about the opposite, human-headed dogs. This myth comes to us from the island of the rising sun, Japan. So without any further ado, let's turn to. To start with, a quick note on my sources. I'm using a lot of online sources for the Jinmenken, but I'm also using the book Mysterious Creatures of Japanese Folklore, the Book of the Yokai by Michael Dylan Foster. It's an interesting book, and it does have individual entries for different yokai, but it also gives a general overview of the yokai and the different traditions associated with them. I do recommend it, and I'll put a link to it in the description. The Jinmenkin, as they are called in Japan, are yokai. Now, you may be asking, just what is a yokai? And that is a fair question. Yokai is a Japanese term for a wide range of supernatural beings, and they can range from some being malevolent to benign, but most often they're just mischievous. They can be, however, incredibly dangerous or fairly helpful, and they're often spirits and creatures of in-between places or in-between forms, never really one thing or another. Let me give you some examples. There's the Kappa, which is roughly humanoid, but with a number of turtle-like characteristics, and there's the Tengu, which is often depicted as being a humanoid with a lot of raven-like characteristics. Both of these creatures are yokai, and many yokai are also shapeshifters, and many of them tend to be found in the empty spaces in time, the liminal places, if you will. Like when you're alone on the road or at twilight. They can very roughly be compared to the Western idea of fae and the many types of fairy beings, but I would tell you this isn't a one-to-one fit. A yokai is not a fairy. It's a yokai. These are stories from a different cultural worldview, and while there are a lot of similarities, there are also a lot of differences we need to respect. That said, much like the creatures of European folklore, many of the yokai have also become creatures of urban legend and cryptid lore, because stories tend to adapt to the places and times they find themselves in. In the stories, the Jinmenkin isn't an especially dangerous or powerful yokai, but it does have some interesting abilities. Before we get into those abilities, though, I would like to cover the history of this story. Now, the earliest references I can find to this yokai are in the Edo period, with the earliest date I could nail down for sure being by the Western calendar 1810 AD. And the story starts with saying that there was a human-faced puppy being put on display in a kind of sideshow, and the origin story for this puppy is... oh boy. Listen, there's a reason the Dreadlord doesn't like this channel, so let's dive into it. The story goes that there was a man suffering from syphilis, and he heard that engaging in certain private acts, let's call them, with a dog would cure him of this disease. I am lost as to the logic of this, and let me assure you folks, this did not work. It was never going to work. If you're suffering from this kind of disease, doing more of what got you sick in the first place is not going to cure you. Go see a doctor. Well, the consequences of his actions were that the dog had puppies, and all of them were born with human faces due to their parentage. I'm left wondering if they actually resembled the guy in question, which I'm not sure which answer to that question would be more upsetting, so we're just gonna keep moving. So, just as a quick historical aside, I'm going to say it's lucky for this guy that he didn't try this during the reign of Shogun Tokugawa Tsunenoshi, also known as the Dog Shogun. Tsunenoshi ruled from 1680 to 1709, and he made abusing dogs a capital crime. No, seriously, he crucified a dude for choking out a puppy, which I think might be just a little bit too far, but I don't entirely disapprove of that. So imagine what he would do to our fictional syphilis sufferer here. It would not be pretty. The Dog Shogun also set up publicly funded dog shelters, and perhaps more importantly, he was one of the first Japanese rulers to outlaw infanticide, which is kind of crazy that it took that long, right? I do approve of banning the killing of newborns, call me a softie, but I am wandering off topic, so let's get back to the yokai. Thank you for your patience. The Jinmenkin would linger in the background of yokai tradition and stories. They didn't really become popular until the 1980s, when there was a wave of sightings, mostly reported by school children, many of them claiming they heard it from the friend of a friend. These stories were picked up by mass media and spread, and this led to new sightings and new stories. Most of these stories centered around people encountering this yokai in city alleys and parkways at night. The story goes that you would see what looked to be a normal dog rooting around in the trash or with its head in the bush, usually facing away with you, and if you approached it, it would spin around, and lo and behold, there would be a human face on this dog, and it would look at you and say something like, "Go away," or "Just leave me alone," or "Oh, a human." Another popular encounter story was one where you would be driving along the road and a dog would zoom past your car at shocking speeds. Seriously, some of these stories claimed that the Jinmenkin were going at over 80 miles an hour, or 130 kilometers for those of you not using American measurements. Once the Jinmenkin passed your car, it would turn around so you could see its human faces, and in some versions of the stories, it would curse you out or even go out of its way to cause car accidents. Although, to be honest, I think that's just drivers looking for someone else to blame. That said, I can understand someone being a little distracted if you see a dog running at 80 miles per hour, it turns around, has a human face, and starts screaming curses at you. That might make me lose control of a vehicle, too. Other fun facts, their poop is said to be green, and if one bites you in order to save your life, the limb they bit will have to be cut off. Why isn't clear in my sources? Nothing says the Jinmenkin are poisonous, so maybe there's some other supernatural effect at play, but they all agree that if you don't cut off the limb, one bite's enough to kill you. Other stories claims that they could glide from rooftops to rooftops like giant flying squirrels, and still others claim that the Jinmenkin can leap almost 20 feet, or 6 meters if you prefer those measurements. Now, those last two abilities do give some ammo to the argument that every sighting of the Jinmenkin was really a sighting of one of Japan's native monkeys, and some of these monkeys do get large enough that if you saw them from behind in the dark, you could briefly mistake them for a dog, but when they turned around, you saw that monkey face, and sometimes those faces are a bright red. That would give you a heck of a shock in the night, I think. Honestly, as an explanation, it does make sense. Another explanation is this could just be people having fun and telling people a far-out story and saying, "No, bro, this totally happened to me." Either way, these well-grounded and factual explanations weren't very satisfying to the Japanese people of the time, and their response was basically,
"You're no fun?"
If I'm going to be entirely honest, I don't think my fellow Americans would find a lot of satisfaction in that well-grounded factual explanation either, and I think they would do the same thing the Japanese of the 1980s and 90s did, come up with their own wild stories explaining the origin of the Jinmenkin sightings. Stories like they were the products of genetic experimentation that escaped government or corporate labs, or they were the ghost of people killed by cars while walking their dogs. I have a dog, I walk him fairly often. I'm gonna be honest, if I got hit by a car and I came back with my face on my dog's body, I would be pretty irritated, and I wouldn't want to talk to any of you people either. So that does kind of explain a bit. Jinmenkin would appear in the game and anime entitled Yokai Watch, and in the Toho comic Wild and Horned Hermit. Beyond that, I didn't find any appearances, and I can't say I've run into them in fiction, which is a shame because using one of these guys in your stories or one of your games would likely give your players or your audience a bit of a pause, because here's something they haven't run into before, and it's kind of freaky and weird, and they're going to stop to think for a moment before they move on. They are, on their own, a good example of how yokai or folklore in general gets adopted to the modern era, and how today's urban legend stories really aren't that different from the stories we told each other in the past centuries. Like I said earlier, stories adapt, and when we look at the stories being told as urban legends, or on the internet, for example maybe in the subreddit creepypasta, we can see the similarities between those stories and the stories of centuries past, and we should be aware that these stories, much like us, are not that different from the people and folklore of long ago. Because if there's one commonality I've found across history and cultures, it's that people like coming up with weird stuff and telling each other stories about it. And I hope that never changes. I hope in 10,000 years, wherever and whatever humanity is, all of its members are still telling each other stories about the weirdest shit they can think up. And I also hope that these videos help you come up with some stories of your own. It's on that note that I'm going to stop today's video. I hope you found it informative or at least entertaining. And if you did, please leave a like, a comment, or consider subscribing, as all of that helps in my eternal battle with the Dread Lord algorithm. Terror be on his name. You can also support my fight by joining the Everwise at my Patreon, where $1 a month gets you a vote on upcoming content. Speaking of patrons, I'd like to give a special thank you to Big Steve and ZenGetterX, my biggest supporters. Next week, we're going to return to another video I did earlier this year, and we're going to take another look at the Basilisk. I hope you join me, but until then, take care of each other, take care of yourselves, and of course, keep reading!